Hello, you have Ted Corless with the Corless Law Group coming to you from Tampa, Florida. It's been approximately 3 days since Hurricane Ian made landfall in the state of Florida, wreaking havoc over areas in southwestern Florida, specifically areas like Fort Myers, Bonita Beach, and other areas within Lee County and the surrounding areas. We have now seen that while we may be done with Ian, Ian is not done with us. Ian has now left the state of Florida and is headed towards the Carolinas. Areas like Myrtle Beach are starting to batten down the hatches and fear that the same damage that we saw in southwestern Florida is going to occur there. My suggestion to you is, here is our phone number, 813-258-4998, or go to our website at www.corlesslawgroup.com. to find resources to help you make decisions about what the next steps are. We're going to focus this video cast specifically on some of those questions, some of the most obvious and initial questions that are going to need to be answered, either by you or by the insurance company at least. And it really comes down so many times to a very simple question for the insurance company. In the setting of a hurricane, especially one as powerful as this, with the storm surge that we saw in areas reaching up over 15 feet, the question becomes for an insurance company whether the damage to the structure was the result of the wind caused by the hurricane itself or by water that arose from the storm surge. For those of you who have not had the rather unpleasant experience of being in a hurricane, storm surge is this. When the storm goes over an area, a tidal area, the result is that it literally sucks all of the water out of the bay. There are videos that have made their way around Tampa. We're showing people walking around Hillsborough Bay as if it were some kind of beach, even though traditionally it's underwater. And see, what happens is all that water gets sucked out to sea, and then when the storm turns, it releases all of that water and it comes back. But when it comes back much stronger than when it departed. While the water may have ordinarily been, say, 6 to 8 feet, now we're seeing areas where it was maybe 15 to 20 feet. And the areas are not designed to handle that level of water, and especially not the pressure that a massive immediate return of water can cause. This is where the greatest loss of life and the greatest damage to property occurs. When insurance companies write their insurance policies, they write them around the issue of damage caused by wind. Example, a home that I was at yesterday has no roof. Okay, that's an easy question of what caused that. The building is still there. Yes, it was flooded, but the roof is gone. And that would be a pretty easy calculation that the wind is what caused that damage. Well, why does it matter if it's wind or water? Well, it matters if it's wind or water because under most insurance policies, they don't cover flooding. You have to buy a separate policy for that, and there's only one place to get that, and that's under the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. And so what insurance companies will want to try to do as best they can is to push these losses away from them under their coverage and instead demand that the insured file a claim under the NFIP. If you go to our website, we have a specific blog that we're posting with this video cast that will give you some of these resources. Specifically, I'm going to have the link and it will show you where you need to file a claim with the NFIP. And my suggestion to you is going to be, in most cases, happy to take your call to discuss next steps, but and on my nickel. Because here's the truth. I want to help as many people as we can, and I'm certain along the way there are going to be plenty of opportunities for me to have to pick fights with insurance companies, and I'll get taken care of there. Right now, it's about reaching out to the community, and our community of individuals that we serve here at my firm are all across the entire state of Florida. There are other firms that go outside of the state of Florida and do the same thing. I'm here for Florida hurricanes and other natural disasters and the manner in which those events engage their insurance coverage. And so if you're in Fort Myers Beach, or if you're even in Tampa, where we were really spared, I would say that it doesn't mean that there weren't areas that were damaged as a result of wind and water here, but the real damage occurred just south of us, probably starting at about Sarasota and going all the way down the coast to Bonita Beach. We have a couple of projects running right now, interestingly enough, Hurricane Irma, that have never been resolved. The insurance companies are still fighting us on those claims, and now those individual buildings have been attacked by not just one hurricane, Hurricane Irma, but now two hurricanes, Hurricane Ian, which is significantly more powerful than Hurricane Irma was. And so we begin by this question of wind or water, because what you need to understand right now, if you are the owner of a property or a renter in some situations, you're going to want to make decisions about whether to file a claim. And if you have severe damage, or not, if you have any kind of damage, that it was bad enough that it was caused by the hurricane, you're probably going to need to notify your insurance company, and you ought to do that sooner rather than later. I know that many people have a tendency to want to avoid making claims. I get that, because you don't want an extensive claims history that will haunt you later when you go to apply for insurance. But when I'm dealing routinely with boards of directors, it's important that you have the board get in contact with the agent who provided you the insurance to begin a dialogue if you see that you've had any damage whatsoever, even if it's just damage to a roof, and even if the property didn't become uninhabitable. The damage to a roof can be severe, even if you don't necessarily have leaking or immediate identification of the consequences of a wind loss to a roof. You can have damage to a wind loss, you can have damage arising from a wind loss to your roof without necessarily having big drips of water coming through. Storms are designed sometimes to take, not the storms, the roofs are designed to be able to take certain amounts of damage without necessarily destroying the underlaminate. So you could have a covered loss above your deductible, but not have a single crack or roof leak in any of the buildings that are under your condo association. And so you're going to want to assess the condition of your property as best you can. I don't necessarily want to see members of boards climbing on top of roofs and wandering around, but I think the idea here is most associations have a general idea of the condition of the property, or at least the way it was maybe 10 days ago, and now you've got something to compare it to. And so again, if you go to my website and you find the blog, should be easy to find, about this issue, I'm going to give you the link for NFIP, and we'll have some information on how you can notify not only your insurance company, which you should have done, but also identify NFIP and get that underway. Now, the way NFIP adjusts their losses is that they will traditionally assign those to a particular insurance company who's in the state of Florida, and then they essentially adjust it as if it's one of their own. I hope that you happen to have purchased an NFIP policy and it's going to be adjusted by an insurance company who actually has your best interest in mind. And I unfortunately have to tell you that not all insurance companies in the state of Florida are as interested in their insureds as they are in their own self-preservation. But with the estimates of the damage created by Ian being in excess of $100 billion, we're going to see some insurance companies go out of business over this. We just will. Despite the fact that so many have reduced their exposure, they still had enough exposure that if they made poor choices over how to insure their buildings or the location of most of their risks, there are going to be insurance companies that won't survive this. But the good news is you will. And so let's make sure that we can get all of the damages under your policy for your benefit. So most of the benefits under your policy are going to fall under 3 different categories. So the first category, most insurance policies have an A, a B, and a C. And so let's start out with coverage A. Your coverage A are going to be your building limits, meaning that you have insured your property for a certain amount in the event of loss or replacement. And then this question becomes, have you satisfied the deductible, which can be anywhere from 2% to 5%, and I've even seen 10% policies. And so how does the deductible work? Excuse me. So the way the deductible works is it is essentially your contribution to the loss. And that would mean that you would have to demonstrate the amount of damages are more than 2% of the amount of the insurance. Not 2% of the loss, but 2% of the coverage. So if the average home price in the state of Florida last year was $390,000, if you had insured your home for $390,000, you will pay deductible up to 5 or 10% of that amount. Now that can be a substantial amount of money, obviously, to most homeowners. Don't have that kind of money laying around. The other issue that you might run into is that there are certain insurance policies in the state of Florida that don't provide coverage for some of the most commonly damaged components of the building. Let me give you an example. Single-family residences insured by, unfortunately, one of our biggest insurance companies, Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. Citizens does not provide coverage in most circumstances for the screen cage, the lanai cage, as we call them here. And so the idea is, if you were living in an area where lanai cages are required over a pool and you have a loss to the building, the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come up with the money for the deductible. The second thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come up with the money for the screen cage. I did speak with a screen cage company this morning, and for an average sized home, say a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the state of Florida, the screen cage right now could run you in excess of $25,000. And so I've addressed this issue with legislators in the past who don't seem to have an appreciation for this kind of commingling of damages, if I could say it that way, that you've got a screen cage that you have to pay for because your homeowners association obligates you to have one, and you have a swimming pool which has to be screened in, and then you add in the amount of the deductible. There are people who have covered losses who are not going to get $1 from their insurance company under coverage A until the loss exceeds $40,000 or $50,000. And so the hope here is that most insureds are going to have the benefit of their policy, and for these particular issues, there may be some assistance from the federal government in areas that were especially war-torn after Ian crossed their path. So that's coverage A. Now, coverage B is your personal property. Coverage B is going to cover any kind of damage to your personal property that resulted from the cause of loss. That would mean, like in sinkhole cases, we rarely see coverage B claims because unless there's been a catastrophic loss to the building by sinkhole, which is pretty rare, you can have severe damage, just not catastrophic damage that would also affect the contents of the policy. So you're going to have a separate amount of money that is set aside for those personal property items. And depending on the way they wrote your policy, certain items will be capped. I happen to have a couple of very expensive guitars, and they would be limited, as well as my stereo equipment, to a certain amount under the policy, unless I've bought additional coverage for those particular items, which this storm reminds me I probably ought to do that. For a lot of people, their personal property coverage has been juiced up because of things like jewelry. But again, jewelry, hurricane, as long as you can find the ring, then probably it hasn't been damaged. But that's personal property. And then the coverage C is what we usually will, different policies use a coverage C, or some of them just call them supplemental coverages. And most of what that is the coverage C goes back into the coverage A amount and gives you additional amounts for certain kinds of damage. Let me give you an illustration. That would be if you have a property under coverage A that is severely damaged to the point where you're literally having to remove parts of the structure. That's very expensive to do that. And so there is a debris removal element that is found in coverage C. And the debris removal gives you an additional amount of money to cover that particular kind of item. And so that's, again, another illustration of coverage C is where they drop a lot of these little coverages in. But it's important when you're examining your coverage, and we do this for our clients, real issue that where we can add value to your claim is to make sure that along the way, the insurance company has covered all of the damages and engaged all of the coverages. That's the most common issue that we see. So the other thing that I think it's a good transition to address is this issue of value. And that is, okay, they send an insurance adjuster out. Insurance adjusters are not general contractors. They don't have to be. A lot of great insurance adjusters out there that aren't general contractors. But when it's a more sophisticated loss, it's probably going to be necessary, if we're talking about wind versus water damage, that they bring out an individual that has the necessary training to make an assessment of the impact on the building. The other issue that it's important to understand is, it's one thing for an insurance company to come out and tell you that they think they know how much your damages are, but remember, don't commit to anything until you know what the county you're living in is going to address. So this issue of the federal insurance plan for flooding, NFIP exists kind of within the architecture of other rules that are enforced on the county level. And here, let me explain that. What it means is that for many people in these last several years, when they may be living in a house that was built in 1986. Well, in 1986, you could build a house in these coastal areas, literally where your living room is right on the first floor. You're literally right on the ground floor. But as time went on, NFIP knows that most of the damage that's caused by water occurs within the first 10 feet of the home. And so what counties were required to do, if you had enough damage to your property and you were rebuilding for any particular reason, the county has what's called a 50% rule. And the 50% rule said that if your repairs are greater than 50% of the market value of the structure, then that required you, before you would be able to get a building permit, to literally raise the house to 10 feet. And really what they're saying is, you're gonna have to bulldoze the house. And that way, when the flood comes in, the only real damaged area would be an area where you might have an automobile parked. They're not replacing kitchens or bathrooms or living rooms. And that would significantly reduce the exposure to the NFIP. And that's the way the rules are written. Well, so now we know why. And why, when we submit claims for our clients, we go ahead and go to the county and find out whether or not we've hit the 50% rule, because once we've done that, it changes everything. And so the most common sequence that we see with our clients is this. And you might find yourself in the initial stages of this. So you've contacted your insurance company, they've come out and they've looked at your property. They've then told you that the damages are not really that severe. In fact, in their calculation, your damages are below the deductible. And then they close the claim and off they go. A little commercial break to answer one question. How long can the insurance company take before they come out, assess your property, and make a payment? What is the requirement? Well, through a lot of lobbying to a predominantly Republican-led legislature, especially under the DeSantis administration, they've really defended the insurance industry. And I guess their explanation is, by defending the insurance company and making it more difficult to get to the money, that's going to encourage more insurance companies to sell insurance in our state. My interpretation is that's anti-consumer behavior. Insurance companies know how to adjust their losses and how to do so timely. And if you want to sell enough insurance in the state of Florida that you're going to be exposed to heavy risk, you also should have made a contribution to the community to have the resources here, so that in the event of a catastrophic loss like Hurricane Ian, that there won't be severe delay in the manner in which you make a coverage determination. And so, you know, the obvious ones are the easy ones. If your house is 6 blocks away now because it was picked up by water and dumped, then that's pretty easy for the insurance company to know what they need to do and what decisions need to be made. If, on the other hand, you have damage that the insurance company said only caused, say, 20% of the shingles on your property, shingles on your roof to get tossed, then they're going to take a position that you're probably below your deductible and there's no real need for them to pay you anything. But the question is then, how long after assessing your property do they have to give you an answer? Because that's what most people need to know, because they need to know if they've left the community because their home is severely damaged, or they're without electricity, which can cause additional damage through, people have refrigerators or freezers with food, and they don't have generators necessarily. So now they have lost all of the value. And let's be honest, with the price of dairy these days, then I'll tell you what, losing a couple of gallons of milk is kind of a big deal, especially the cost of bacon. And bacon's $10. I mean, when did bacon get $10 a pound? So if I happened to be in an area that got creamed by Ian, then everything's got to go into the mix. Well, there's a 90-day rule. Believe that the legislature and the governor in the state of Florida are cool that you can make a claim with your insurance company, and they have 90 days before they have to give you an answer. And then once they give you, let's say the 90 days are up, but there's something they claim is beyond their control, then they get an extension until they clear that element. But from there, they have 2 more weeks. So it's 90 plus 2 weeks. So they have 90 days to get out, assess your loss. The hope is you have the benefit of an insurance company that's using a qualified claims adjuster who knows what they're doing and will be able to know from the onset the severity of the loss. The one element, though, here that I think Hurricane Irma helped to create an issue with access to resources to complete these repairs. Irma created a shortage of 2x4s, plywood, roofing materials, roofing tiles. And that issue then was compounded during the pandemic because of supply side interruption. Well, Hurricane Ian's going to then take it to the next level, because the amount of damages that are caused are going to have an effect. And it won't just affect us in the state of Florida, it affects everybody in the United States. If you look at all of the fires on these last 2 years in California and Colorado, it created shortages of materials that were coming in from other countries to satisfy the needs that we have. And so Ian's going to make it even worse, which is going to delay the resolution of the claims even more. And for some homes, you're then going to be dealing with additional problems with mold and water because they're just going to rot. And so, you need to do what you can to stabilize your home environment predominantly so that you can get back in and live life normally again. But the other reason is that you can't just take a home, close it all up with water and mold, and not know that in days or weeks that the interior of the property could become completely uninhabitable. There's a lot of people that have some dark days ahead of them over these next couple of weeks or months, and you're going to need help. So who do you look out? Who do you call? Do you call a contractor? Do you call a lawyer? Do you call a public adjuster? Well, let's talk about all of those. Let's start with me, and that is, we're here to provide support without commitment, meaning that if you need to know what your next steps are, you need to call me, 813-258-4998, or go to our website at corlesslawgroup.com, or just type my name, Ted Corless, in Google. You'll find me. And we need to talk about where you are and what the next steps would be. One next step could be to hire a public adjuster. Absolutely. And there are some spectacular public adjusters. And if you need the name of one, I'll give them to you. Okay? But there are also, just like everything else, there are public adjusters that are not as qualified and are not necessarily looking for your best interests. And so there's some people out there, and lawyers too, that are going to kind of play with some of the numbers. But truthfully, in the state of Florida, there are restrictions in the first 12 months of a natural disaster like this. There are restrictions on how much a public adjuster can charge you for their conduct. There's also a lot of protections afforded to you that even though you sign up with a public adjuster, there's a certain number of days that you can cancel the contract without consequence. And so by finding public adjusters who have established reputations for caring for their claimants, you're going to be better served. And I'm happy to provide that information to you. And if you have questions about a public adjuster's contract, happy to look at it for you and give you perspective. The truth is that it's pretty uncommon in these situations for insurance adjusters' first number to you to really make a lot of sense. And it's just the truth. And it's not that I think that insurance adjusters from insurance companies or independent adjusters are deliberately trying to understate claims. It's just that they're fed by an industry that they don't get extra help because they're being generous with their estimates. I just think that, especially if you have the benefit of working with some of the more name brand insurance companies, you're going to find that they have a higher standard for how they adjust their losses. They just do. My home here in the state of Florida is insured by State Farm. My home in Colorado, State Farm. Why is that? Well, because I believe State Farm wants to protect its brand globally, and they would never leave a Florida insured behind. Now, there are some insurance companies that have designed themselves such in a way that if things got really hairy here in the state of Florida, they could carve the state of Florida out and just let it go. Never felt that way with State Farm, and I've always felt very confident that if I have a significant loss, that they're going to be there for me. And more to the point, that they're going to send an adjuster out who's not worried about overwriting or overestimating the damages. And so you're going to know that pretty fast. So don't sign anything from the insurance company until you talk to counsel. It's the truth that Governor DeSantis likes to talk about the fact that we are one of the most litigated states in property claims in the entire United States. Well, that of course has a lot to do with the sheer number of natural disasters that we deal with. Ohio, for example, doesn't get a lot of hurricanes. They don't get a lot of forest fires. They don't get a lot of tornadoes. We get all of that, not forest fires, but we get anything associated with water or wind, it finds its way to the state of Florida. So the sheer number of claims that we have to submit and the strain on the resources of insurance companies is going to create negative pressure. It's going to not necessarily in the best interest of the homeowners. So if you are on the board of directors for an association and you believe that you all need to get together and you need to assess the condition of the property, and if you believe that there's been impact damage either caused by water or wind, you need to consult with your condo attorney or find a lawyer like myself who specializes in property insurance. It's what we do. Insurance, that's what we do. People ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them my elevator speech only takes about 2 floors. I look at them and say, what do I do? I sue insurance companies. That's all I do. And insurance companies sometimes, even with your best interests in mind, will make mistakes and have an adjuster who missed something. And it's important that you address not only all of the damage, but making sure to extract as much coverage as is available in your insurance policy. And that's where my experience of more than 27 years, the very first trial I ever had was on a property insurance case, and it was in 1994. And since then, I've seen every form of natural disaster, from fire, wind, water, raccoons, sinkholes, snakes, rats, mold, termites, anything that can destroy a building. We've seen it, and the damage is always more complex to repair than anyone could ever imagine. And so I would again suggest to you, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. My phone is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you go to 813-258-4998 or go to my website at www.corlesslawgroup.com. We have all of the individuals that can do an assessment of the damage, including engineers, general contractors who can prepare estimates and do repairs for you. We also have assistance available to you to find additional living expense coverage under your policy. If you're needing to live somewhere else, we can help you relocate and get the insurance company to pay for it if it's covered. And most importantly is just, you got this insurance policy. You need to get a copy of your insurance policy, especially if you're on a board of an association. And we need to sit down and we need to understand exactly how all of these issues are dealt with under the coverage that you have. I hope I've not thrown too much at you, but I do want you to know and feel that you have resources available to you. They're a phone call away. And again, 813-258-4998, wherever you might be in the state of Florida. It's all the way up in the Panhandle or all the way in the Florida Keys. Happy to be there and happy to help. We'll be on the road here significantly over these next couple of weeks. And I look forward to meeting you and seeing how we can make life just a little bit better for you after this event. Most important thing is, remember, sticks and bricks, all it is. It's just three little pigs. Somebody came and huffed and they puffed and they blew your house down, but you're okay, your family's okay, and sure, your stuff got wet, but you and I can go back to the stuff store and get some more. All right, Ted Corless, Corless Law Group, be well.